Hello, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Keith Ward. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on ransomware tripwires monitoring for threats. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. That Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from. And it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event that you have any technical issues. A browser refresh will fix most issues, but if that doesn't work, let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. At the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handouts section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these expert series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors makes it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to those sponsors. Over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can find in the handouts section of your console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handouts section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. And there's also a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. Now, before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. We're supported by Keeper. Now, as you all know, weak passwords are a major vector for ransomware intrusions. See how Keeper can help by attending a demo and getting a free 3-year subscription to Keeper's personal password manager. Visit keeper.io/free to sign up or to learn more. Today's event is also sponsored by Crowdstrike. With Crowdstrike, you gain key insights, get ahead of adversaries, and make better, faster decisions. You can supercharge your security operations center by extending endpoint protection with threat intelligence. Get more details by downloading the white paper from the link on your screen. This event is also brought to you by Rubrik. Companies around the world rely on Rubrik, the pioneer in zero trust data security, for business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. Rubrik Security Cloud, powered by machine intelligence, enables Rubrik's customers to secure data across their enterprise, cloud, and SaaS applications. Rubrik automatically protects data from cyber attacks, continuously monitors data risks, and quickly recovers data and applications. Find out more at rubrik.com/ransomware. And finally, we're supported by Duo Security. Speed matters when it comes to endpoint security. Detect, respond, and recover from attacks with Duo's cloud-native solution and reduce remediation times by as much as 85%. Duo offers endpoint security built for resilience. Start a free trial at the link on your screen and in your handouts. So once again, remember to take advantage of that handout section where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's content. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, the great Alan Liska. Alan is part of the Computer Security Incident Response team at Recorded Future. But beyond his title, he's just about my favorite ransomware expert. He's involved in ransomware response 7 days a week, and he's also the first expert reporters and government officials call when there's a new type of attack, and that includes me. In addition, Alan is also a columnist for our website, ransomware.org, as well as the author of the book Ransomware, Understand, Prevent, Recover. In other words, yeah, he knows a lot about this subject. Alan, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you for having me, Keith. I've got to say, I'm really excited that Keeper is a sponsor of this event. So Ann Cutler, who used to work for CISA, has just gone over to Keeper, and they seem to be doing really cool things. So lots of great sponsors, but I just want to highlight them as being particularly interesting and new. As Keith said, my name is Alan Liska. I'm part of the CSERT team, so I work on incident responses within Recorded Future as well as working with organizations around the world that have either suffered a ransomware attack or are trying to prevent ransomware attacks. So I'm going to dive into the content. We're going to go a little bit different today, so kind of bear with me on this. We're trying something a little different. We're going to go the Jeff Foxworthy route, which I know those of you who are old enough to know who Jeff Foxworthy is are probably thinking, wait, what does Jeff Foxworthy have to do with ransomware? Well, you, if you've been around for a while, you probably know Jeff Foxworthy's most famous routine. You might be a redneck if. And really, when you think about it, what what those jokes were indicators, right? It's what today we would call an indicators, whether it's an IP address or a domain or whatever. These are indicators of how much of a redneck you are. One or two indicators doesn't necessarily mean you're a redneck. But if you start, identifying with a whole bunch of his jokes, then maybe it's time to consider you that you are a redneck. So, in effect, Jeff Foxworthy, very early on intelligence analyst, except with rednecks. Only now we're going to play the same kind of game, but with ransomware. And the reason why is that a ransomware attack is a complex attack. It is not just the ransomware being delivered, it is everything up to and including that ransomware being delivered that are indicators of an attack. Um, so, and if you've read the book or you've been to, you've been to some of my other talks, you've probably seen this diagram. Um, but this is what we're looking at when we talk about what is composed, what the different stages of a ransomware attack are. So the ransomware actor has to gain initial access, and they do that through whether it's phishing, credential stuffing, reuse, exploiting third parties and using that access, direct exploitation of systems on your network, or insider threat. Um, so they gain that initial access. They're going to load a web shell or loader at that entry point, and then they're going to move through the network. And they're going to use Cobalt Strike. They're going to use Sliver. They're going to use PSExec, and then they're going to deploy these tools that we see over and over again, whether it's Mimikatz, whether it's Powersploit, Bloodhound, Lasagna, Metasploit, AdFind. All of these tools are being used by the ransomware actors. Then they've got to get that data out, and they're going to compress all that. They're going to copy all that data to a single machine. Then they're going to compress it using either 7-zip or WinRAR or something like that. And then they're going to push the data out to a server, and they may use that with rclone or WinSCP, Steelbit, Megasync. And while they're moving from machine to machine, they're going to use some GUIs. They're going to use TeamViewer, AnyDesk, or Splashtop, Otera, Screen Connect. Again, all of these different commonly used tools are being used by ransomware groups to move around your network. And then they're going to deploy the ransomware. But you can see that really the deploying of the ransomware is really that last little bit. All of this is happening beforehand, and it's happening sometimes for weeks on the network before before what you actually see is, before you actually see the ransomware attack. So all these little, kind of tidbits or trails that are being left behind by the ransomware group. And this is what we traditionally would call threat hunting, but it's essentially the same as the you might be a redneck joke. You might have a ransomware attack if you see these events happening. At the very least, you probably have something bad happening in your network that you want to investigate. So we're going to talk about some of these things today, and then we'll get to answer your questions. So, we're using kind of a redneck theme here, or along that lines. But really, what we're talking about here is threat hunting. But threat hunting scares a lot of people away. So, in essence, we're going to try and avoid that for the rest of the conversation. But threat hunting doesn't have to be this super scary thing that only banks with multi-million-dollar security budgets can do. Anybody can do threat hunting if you know your network. And the way threat hunting works is to take the intelligence that you're given. So that intelligence can come from a third-party service provider that you have. It can come from things you've downloaded from notices you've gotten from CISA, or if you have an ISAC for your for your sector, information you've gotten from the ISAC. It could come from a buddy that works for another company and said, "Hey, we saw this. Maybe you should be on the lookout for that." It can come from Twitter, wherever it's coming from. You want to take that intelligence and you want to use that to build threat hunting packages that look for expected badness, that look for the bad things in your network, and then refine that and incorporate that into your regular security workflow. So that's really what we're talking about here. You don't have to have a lot of specialized knowledge. You don't have to have a lot of extra skills in order to threat hunt. What you have to understand is you have to understand how your network works, and you have to know what things are weird. And that's kind of the hard part, right? Because weird is a very nebulous term, and I'm aware of that. But because what's weird is different in every network, and as we get into some of these examples, I'll show you what I mean. So the important thing again, this only works if you understand what's happening in your network, if you're collecting the right logs, if you have good asset management, and so on. And these fundamentals are boring. If you do good vulnerability management, good asset management, nobody's going to invite you to give a talk at Black Hat, but it's critical to have that in order to be able to kind of step to that next level, and be able to carry out these kind of looking for these kind of indicators in your network. You have to know what's normal, what's the baseline, in order to look for the anomalous activity. So let's start with Quackbot, right? Quackbot is a loader that is used by a lot of different bad guys, but increasingly being used by ransomware actors. Quackbot is commodity malware. It doesn't have a whole lot of evasive features to it. It has some, but not a lot. It's relatively easy to catch and spot. So here is, if you follow this link, the DFIR report, which is a great free resource for downloading indicators of ransomware activity. And they have they've got a nice Yara rule that you can use. So if you're using something like Crowdstrike or another EDR, you can feed this into your platform to look for Quackbot. But honestly, as long as you're running any good antivirus tool, you probably will detect Quackbot on your network simply because it is detected by so many antivirus programs. What the bad guys count on is being able to land on a box that's not running any kind of antivirus or any kind of protection. Something on the edge, a server, something like that, where maybe endpoint protection wasn't deployed at all. But generally speaking, Quackbot is fairly detectable, and it's an early sign again of that initial access, the ransomware actor trying to get that first access, or more specifically, the initial access brokers who are then going to turn around and sell it. Slightly more complicated is SOC Ghoulish. So SOC Ghoulish is a social engineering toolkit, generally masquerades as a popular software update. So what you're going to do is you're going to download and execute a compressed JavaScript file. Anything that is compressed JavaScript is automatically suspect. Generally, you don't need anything that is compressed JavaScript. That should not be operating outside of the browser. So, again, if you're running an EDR or an endpoint protection in your platform, looking for any kind of compressed JavaScript is a good idea. But specifically, if you want to look for sock ghoulish, and so the way sock ghoulish is usually delivered is through a phishing email. Sometimes you can get lured to a website, and the website says, "Oh, you need to upgrade your browser in order to access the site." Not real. You click the download, and it turns out to be this JavaScript file. So this is a Yara rule specifically for detecting sock ghoulish. Again, you can look for these Yara rules anywhere, and you should be able to find it. But broadly speaking, if you have an EDR solution or advanced endpoint solution, looking for compressed JavaScript being downloaded is bad, and you can, so you can make those rules, assuming your EDR doesn't do that for you automatically. A lot of the different EDR tools will do that for you automatically. PowerShell is used obviously by a lot of organizations, but ransomware actors really love PowerShell, and they rely heavily on it. A lot of it pre-written stuff. But in order to find out if there's bad PowerShell things going on in your network, you have to log PowerShell. And too many organizations don't log PowerShell activity. So that is something that is not enabled by default on most Windows systems, and it needs to be enabled. And you can use GPO to enable it across the entire organization, which I highly recommend doing. But enabling PowerShell logging allows you to look for common things that ransomware actors do. So ransomware actors love to disable admin accounts. If an admin account was disabled by a PowerShell script, something needs to be investigated. They like to create new admin accounts. That way, they don't have to worry about any any patterns being detected because it's a brand new admin account. Generally speaking, you don't want new admin accounts. You can do things looking for new scripts not previously run. So the way most organizations work that rely heavily on PowerShell is you have PowerShell that do certain things, and those PowerShell scripts run every day or whatever, but they're the same scripts that run over and over again. Not many organizations are constantly creating new PowerShell scripts to do new activities. So monitoring for new scripts not previously run is a great way to find, oh, hey, this is something suspicious happening. Or maybe it is somebody who's written a new script, but either way, you've detected it. Scripts running at odd times. So if you have a schedule of scripts, and this is, again, something where knowing your network is really helpful, reaching out to all the different admins in your network and say, hey, what times do you have PowerShell scripts scheduled to run? What are those scripts and what are they doing? You can get that information. And then anything that's running at a different time, now you can say, okay, this is something that's worth investigating. And again, maybe an administrator set up a new one and forgot to tell you about it. That's fine. You add it to the list. But more likely, it is a script running when things shouldn't be running. So let's go ahead and find out what that is, isolate that machine, and start our investigation. And then I always throw this what else in here because PowerShell is such a powerful tool and so many organizations use it in such different ways. What is weird on your network? And again, weird, I know, is that kind of nebulous term, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, this is our baseline PowerShell usage. This is outside of that baseline usage. Let's go investigate these things. And that last answer, that answer to what else, is going to be different for every organization. But if you can build that baseline profile, then it's easier to pick out the things that are anomalous, the things that are weird to your organization. And that, again, gives you things that you can detect and that you can act on. GUIs. So back to the graph of all of the different ransomware activity that's going on, that's happening. Ransomware actors don't like to work from the command line. They love to download and they love to use portable versions of these GUIs, and that's Screen Connect, AnyDesk, Splashtop, even portable versions of Remote Desktop Protocol. This again requires you knowing what's in your network. What remote tools do your admins use, if any? They may not need to, and so if whatever remote tools they're using, understand that. But then anything that's outside of that, that is where you can say, oh, hey, if we see any of these other tools being used, that is outside of the scope of what's allowed for our admins to use. Let's find out who's using it and why they're using it. And it's a great investigatory point. And the nice thing is, these are legitimate tools. So they're not doing anything to try and hide the fact that they're running. All you need are file hashes, because the file hashes for the different versions of the software. So you want to go a couple versions back for each one. But it's 10 file hashes. You feed that into your EDR or your endpoint protection, anything that can look for certain file hashes. You can either feed it there, or you can run that correlation in your SIM, and just have that as an ongoing list. Hey, we matched the file hash. Somebody's using Screen Connect. That Screen Connect's not allowed in our network. Let's go find out who's using it and why. And maybe it's a user that downloaded and is using it to connect to their home computer. They probably shouldn't be doing that, right? So you found something that maybe isn't ransomware, but an employee doing something they probably shouldn't be doing. But again, this is a relatively simple and easy way to look for ransomware activity. Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is used by almost every ransomware group out there. Now we're starting to see more Sliver, which is a similar type of red team tool to Cobalt Strike, but it's still not as common as Cobalt Strike. So there are a few ways that you can detect Cobalt Strike. So again, if you've got EDR and you have a way of feeding in Yara rules, there are a lot of really good Yara rules and Sigma rules for detecting Cobalt Strike. While the challenge with Cobalt Strike is it does everything it can to hide itself from these kind of detections, it's still not that good. So this is one of those where again, if you get good Yara rules and Sigma rules for Cobalt Strike, you can feed them into your EDR and detect that. And that goes back to one other thing that I forgot to mention earlier. One of the first things that a ransomware group does when they land on a new machine is they kill the endpoint, whatever your security endpoint tool is, whether it's antivirus, whether it's EDR. Having a third-party process kill your security tools should send all kinds of red flags up. But again, most organizations that I talk to don't actually have alerts built around for that. You should get an alert. Endpoint detections, go up and come down all the time as, people shut down their computers, start them back up, whatever. They're not generally shut down by a third party. So if another tool is shutting down your endpoint detection, that should be logged in whatever SIM you're using, and that should be considered a high alert and something that you need to investigate. Again, too many organizations don't do that, and that's an easy way to detect possible early ransomware activity in your network. If you aren't running with an EDR, you don't have sort of an advanced endpoint protection. If you've enabled Sysmon, and I think everybody should enable Sysmon. I know it generates a whole lot of logs and makes a whole lot more work for everybody, but it really can be valuable. Cobalt Strike creates named pipes for communication between services, and it uses the default format MSSE-XXX, so a 4-digit number dash whatever the server is. That is standard. Now that can be changed, but most ransomware groups and most ransomware incidents that I've been involved in, they haven't changed that. So if you have Sysmon enabled and you're monitoring for event ID 17, which is pipe created, and event ID pipe connected, for these alerts, that's often you're looking for that specific set of text. That is often a sign that you've got a ransomware actor using Cobalt Strike in your network. At the very least, it's your red team using Cobalt Strike, and you've stopped your red team and they owe you a beer. So either way, it's a good win. But this is again, if you don't have advanced endpoint protection, you can't feed Yara rules or Sigma rules. This is another way to detect the presence of Cobalt Strike in the network, and using that combined with the other things we've talked about, the PowerShell searching and so on, you start to build that profile, right? Any one of these things may not be indicative of a ransomware attack. When you start to compile them all together, then you've got higher confidence that you're in early stages of a ransomware attack. Ad find is another one. There are some really good Sigma rules. Florian Roth has a fantastic compilation of Sigma rules for ad find and some of the other tools that ransomware actors use. But ad find is a tool for detecting activity against your Active Directory server. Or sorry, it's a tool for scoping out your Active Directory server. So it does a scan and analysis, trying to pull down as much information about the Active Directory as possible so that the ransomware group can then go after it. Ransomware groups love to get their hands on the Active Directory server. In fact, they often need it in order to distribute their ransomware actor. This is an example of a really nice and easy, clean Sigma role. There are a bunch of others out there. But again, this is something you can feed into your endpoint protection, into your EDR, to look for ad find running in the network. Ad find running in the network, almost always a bad thing. Often, most of the time, used by ransomware groups, but used by other threat actors as well. So again, that's another tool that you want to look for in order to find early activity. Along with that, monitoring closely your Active Directory server is really important, because, again, most ransomware actors really want your Active Directory server. So looking for odd logins to your Active Directory server. And what I mean by odd logins, again, varies from network to network, but logging in at odd hours, or a newly created admin account trying to log into the Active Directory server. Somebody trying to log into the Active Directory server from a machine that shouldn't be talking to the Active Directory server, that's on a different network or whatever. All of these kind of things, looking for these login events, targeting your Active Directory server are of course, can be signs of a ransomware attack. And again, you want those in conjunction with these other tools that we're talking about, these other detections we're talking about. Data transfers. So almost every ransomware attack now involves data theft. Ransomware extortion and the whole growth of the extortion ecosystem has been a big story for 2021 and 2022. No different. Ransomware groups love to use mega.io and their associate domains. Most businesses don't use mega.io for data storage, data transfer. As long as you're in one of those, just go ahead and block all of the mega.io and the associated domains like mega.nz and so on. Block all of those domains. It may not stop the activity, the data transfer activity, but it'll slow it down, and it'll alert you anytime somebody's trying to go to that, and that will likely be a ransomware group trying to upload it. And the reason that mega.io is so popular with ransomware groups has nothing at all to do with the service being nefarious. It's that they accept payment in Bitcoin, so you can pay anonymously. But I see more and more ransomware groups moving to mega.io as where they want to exfil the data to. So again, looking for tools like rclone, 7-zip, megasync, and other file transfer tools on your network. Once again, this is where you have to know your baseline. Make sure that these tools aren't already being used by admins, otherwise you'll get a whole bunch of false positives. You want to limit it to, even if it hinders your detection somewhat, you want to limit it to tools that aren't already in use in the network. Again, it's these aren't meant to be these tools aren't meant to be stealthy or anything like that. So just getting the file hashes is often enough, and feeding those in the EDRs and looking for matches. If any of them show up on any of the endpoints, you can detect that and say, oh, hey, we're going to go ahead and try and stop stop the attack before it happens. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the shadow copy deletion. This is kind of your Hail Mary. This is, I'm going to, you might be able to stop this, a ransomware attack if you detect this and you respond fast enough. But, probably don't want to count on this as your main detection method. Before ransomware activity, but before ransomware actors actually deploy the ransomware, they delete all the shadow copies. So shadow copies are automated backups of used files and, like Word files and Excel files and so on. And they delete it because if they don't delete it, then you'll just restore from the shadow copy. Detecting this activity is almost always indicative of a ransomware attack. There are other processes that will delete things in the shadow copies. There aren't any that I'm aware of that will delete everything in the shadow copy. So, this is almost always a ransomware attack, but again, it's the last thing they do before starting to encrypt files. This is a signal rule for detecting shadow copy manipulation. Again, you can feed that into your EDR. You can monitor that for logs. So you can see here's the log source, process creation, Windows. And so as long as you're doing the right kind of Windows logging, you'll be able to pull that out. So again, that is that's another example. Again, there are plenty of signal rules like these that you can feed into your SIM to detect for shadow copy deletion. This is a case where automation is going to be really important, where if you see this activity happening, you need to respond immediately. So this can't filter through your SIM, go through, wait for an analyst to see it, because by then you'll already be fully aware that you have a ransomware attack happening. This is something where if this happens, you really want to set off an automated process to isolate that machine and, if possible, isolate that process that is deleting the shadow copies until you get a chance to investigate it. It can be very disruptive. If it turns out to be wrong, it's not going to turn out to be wrong very often. So again, this is this is a lot, kind of your Hail Mary pass, trying to get a last minute thing. Hopefully some of these other detections have triggered first, and you'll actually be able to take advantage of those in order to stop the ransomware attack before it gets to this point. So I want to thank you all very much for attending. I really appreciate it, and I want to thank Actual Tech for hosting this. I'm happy to answer any questions about this or anything else regarding ransomware. Would love to hear what everybody has to say. We always have such good conversations at these events.
Yeah, absolutely. Great presentation, Alan, as always. Enjoyed that a lot. Let me ask you a few questions, and then we'll get to some questions from the attendees as well. You talked a lot about logging and monitoring and all of that. Is there a danger with all of that going on of alert fatigue for the average admin? And then how do you deal with that? Obviously, you want to know the important stuff, but if you're getting 10 alerts a minute, you can't possibly process them all. So what is the solution here?
There's always alert fatigue. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about that. Running a SIM or whatever it is you're logging takes a lot of care and feeding. And that's just the reality of the situation. Is we tend to use our SOCs as dumping grounds, or at least our SIMs as dumping grounds. So anything that can log gets sent to a SIM. And that means we wind up with SOC analysts who have to filter through a whole lot of alerts in order to get to the ones that they need. And that's why that's why that care and feeding of your SIM is so important. But creating better filters to make sure that only the top things are getting to you. And if possible, if you've got integration with a SOAR or another automated solution, automate those alerts that a human doesn't have to touch. If it's something, hey, this comes in, we just need to open a ticket and then send that ticket off to somebody else to deal with it. An analyst shouldn't touch that. That should go automatically over to wherever it needs to go without an analyst having to look at it. So a combination of constant updating and maintenance along with automation whenever possible is absolutely the best approach to doing that, because you can easily drown in alerts, and I'm fully aware of that. We've gone through that process internally at Recorded Future, where we constantly have to update and manage our SIM to make sure we're not getting too many alerts. The other thing that I'll throw out there is, if it is too much and it's in the budget, consider an MSSP or an MDR, managed detection and response. Outsource some of that alerting, and that way your team can focus on the things that really matter.
And as you do it more and more, you will also kind of develop your own mental filter. I would imagine that you'll be able to spot much more quickly what you really need to be aware of and what can slide.
Never do a puzzle with a
So,
SOC analyst.
yep.
I was gonna say, never work on a puzzle with a SOC analyst, because they're really good at finding the patterns, and they will smoke you in putting together a puzzle.
I'll keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit about some trends here, Alan. How is ransomware changing since you started doing this, and what are some of the biggest things that we need to be aware of in how it is evolving these days?
Well, maybe let's not go back to when I started doing this, because when I started doing this, ransomware actors demanded gift cards. So it's a little bit different now.
Right, right.
But really over the last year, a
Well,
few
let's say
things
from
that
a
were
couple years ago. Right, right.
sure. So we've gone from a few years ago where everything was a single machine to now we encrypt whole networks, and we've gone from encryption was your biggest problem to now encryption and extortion are your biggest problem. So it's not just I've got files that are encrypted. I also have all my data shoved out on a data extortion site. Um, but now we're also getting into the problem of geopolitics, right? And you and I are tech guys. We're used to our focus on how do we come up with technical solutions. But now, for example, one of the bigger players in ransomware is North Korea. Not threat actors in North Korea, but North Korea, the country, deploying ransomware. And North Korea is a sanctioned entity. So when you pay a ransom to North Korea, you are technically breaking the law. Um, so you now have to think about that as you're planning and as you're trying to decide what you want to do with, respond to a ransomware attack. Hey, if it's North Korea, do we have to report this to the government? And are we going to be subject to a fine if we have to pay the ransom? What are the and so obviously you bring your lawyers into that and your compliance people in that to make sure that you're all making an informed decision ahead of time, because you don't want to have those discussions after the ransomware attack. You want to have them before the ransomware attack. So having to think about this not just from a technical level, but from a geopolitical level, that's a whole new area for exploration and for ransomware incident responders.
Just what we need on top of the headache of having your data scrambled. Right now we have to think about where is it coming from, what can we do about it. What are the political situations, Russia invading Ukraine and North Korea and all of these things. You're like, do we really have to add that on top of just losing data? It's insane, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So
It's
let's yeah, yeah. Um, let's talk a little bit about one of the big trends over the last year or two. Ransomware as a service, very popular now. Is that still as popular? Is it still growing as much as it is? Is it leveling out? Well, first of all, define it real quickly, and then talk about where it is heading.
So ransomware as a service is basically multi-level marketing for bad guys. what it is I decide that I'm going to set up a ransomware offering, and then I make my ransomware offering available to everybody. So, Keith, you don't know how to set up your own ransomware, but you really want to get into ransomware. So, you give me money. I give you an exploit, a portable executable that is, this is your ransomware. And then you go ahead and deploy the ransomware however you're going to do it. It calls into my infrastructure, and I've got a little portal that you can log into, and you can see the number of victims that have checked in, and so on. And then any victim that pays, I get 10 to 20% off the top, and you get the 80 to 90% that are left. So that's what ransomware as a service is. And absolutely, you're right. For the last 2 years, that's the big talk that we've had, because we've basically seen mega groups like Lockbit and Conti, Alpha V, and before that Revil, that have come out of these ransomware groups that have literally hundreds of affiliates sometimes. What has been interesting this year is in January, one of the biggest ransomware groups, Conti, um, got all of their information exposed. A researcher, so when Russia invaded Ukraine, Conti came out in full-throated support of Russia, and a Ukrainian researcher who'd already infiltrated their infrastructure was like, "No, you didn't," and they just spread everything out on the internet. Years of chats, all of their infrastructure, all of their member information, and so on. In fact, the Department of Justice used some of that data, and yesterday issued a $10 million reward and named names in the not just named names, but they also provided pictures of these bad guys in the reward posting they did yesterday. So Conti is having a really bad year, which is great for the rest of us. Um,
Yeah.
what's interesting is that since that's happened, what we've seen is a lot of affiliates have decided that maybe being part of a big group isn't a good idea. And so since January 1st, we've seen 78 new ransomware variants this year, which is more than we've seen at any other time since 2015, when the Hidden Tear ransomware source code was posted. Now, when we say new variants, these aren't new ransomware. What it is the Conti source code was leaked. The Chaos ransomware source code was leaked. The Revil ransomware source code was leaked. And what the affiliates are doing is they're taking the leaked source code, they're making their own ransomware and saying, we're going to be a mom and pop shop for now. We don't want to be the Walmart of ransomware. We're going to go be, Sturgis and Sons and set off in the corner and have our own ransomware. And yeah, maybe we won't make millions of dollars. We also won't have the Department of Justice offering $10 million to bring us in. So, they're seeing that as kind of the trade-off. Understand that is still a very nascent trend. We're seeing more of it, but the big guys are still the ones carrying out most of the attack. So, like last month, Lockbit accounted for more than 50% of all publicly known ransomware attacks. Alpha V accounted for another 15% of those. So just right there, 65% of ransomware attacks were from two big ransomware as a service groups. But it is worth watching that trend to see what happens.
I should point out also that you actually wrote about Conti on our website, ransomware.org. You have a monthly column, and you had talked about some of the ways Conti is operating or was operating then. Really eye-opening stuff. So I encourage everyone watching this to look up your columns on ransomware.org. A huge, great source of valuable information. I wanted to ask you one more quick thing before we get to some more attendee questions. What is if you had one piece of advice you could give every company, and only one, in terms of preventing ransomware, what would you tell them? What is the single most important thing you can do as a company to prevent ransomware?
That is such a hard question, because I wish there was one easy answer. Again, the reason that I like to talk about the threat hunting, or in this case, you might have a ransomware attack is that if you have a good EDR system or you have a good advanced endpoint system, you can miss a lot of things and still detect the activity. And that's really kind of the way I want people to think about a ransomware attack. It's like a boxing match, right? You don't have to get a knockout in the first or second round as long as you get that TKO by the end. And that's really what's important. And an EDR helps you do that. So, endpoint advanced endpoint detection can really go a long way to covering for faults in your security.
Right, right. Okay, let's get to some attendee questions here. Ned asks, when is it ever advisable to pay out the ransom? Now, this is a big topic. We've covered it multiple times on our on ransomware.org, and I've got a follow up for that particular question. So the first one, is it ever advisable to pay out the ransom when you're the victim of an attack? The follow up on that is, even if you pay up, are you really guaranteed to get all of your data back? So let's talk about those.
So, as a security person, I'll tell you it's never advisable to pay the ransom. That I mean, just broadly blanket speaking, it's never advisable. But the reality is that it's not always a security concern. If the ransomware actor got your backups and your options are pay the ransom or shut the business down, you're going to pay the ransom. Um, and I understand that. I'm not thrilled, but I'm sure you're not thrilled with it either. So nobody ever enjoys paying the ransom. Keep in mind that a lot of cyber insurance companies will no longer cover ransom payments. They did for a while, and a lot of them have said, no, we're not going to support that anymore. So you will likely be paying out of pocket. Um, Most of the time, you are going to get the decryptor. Um, your decryptor may not be very good. In fact, it almost is never any good. Your incident response team, if you've bought in a third party or you have an incident response team, will likely have to rewrite the decryptor so that it actually works across the network. Almost every incident response I've been on, the decryptors had to be rewritten. That's just the reality of the situation. Ransomware actors make good ransomware; they don't make good decryptors. Not surprising. The key is the important part. The key that is in that decryptor that will almost always work. Nothing's 100%, but it will almost always work. What I will tell you is that if they've stolen data from your network, that data is out there. They're going to lie to you and they're going to tell you that they're going to secure delete it. They may even show you an image of them secure deleting it. It is a lie. That data, we've seen it happen before. That data eventually winds up on underground forums and other places for sale. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. So assess whatever data was stolen from your network and assume that that data is going to be out on the internet somewhere. And it's unfortunate. And I hate to have to tell people that ransomware actors are lying bastards. They're going to lie to you about deleting the data.
And what you're describing, you alluded to it earlier, when they publish the private data, is commonly called double extortion in the ransomware industry. It seems to me in my reporting and in the articles we've running, but that is becoming almost as common as a ransomware attack right now. So you really have to worry about securing all that data. Is that your experience too, that it's just a regular part of an attack, not just the encryption, but the publishing of private information?
For years, you and I have been beating the drum of you have to have backups, 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 and people are finally listening to that. Um, and so, yes, so now every ransomware actor, almost every ransomware group out there steals data and has that secondary extortion. In fact, the column that you probably haven't had a chance to read because I just sent it to you this morning is all about the groups who only do extortion. So there are some groups out there now like Lapsus and Karakurt that only steal the data. They don't encrypt at all. They just they just publish the stolen data and use that as their extortion mechanism. So it's not only becoming increasingly popular for some groups, that is their only method of making money in extortion.
Right. And not just backups, right? I mean, air-gapped, immutable backups that simply cannot be changed because they want to encrypt the backups sometimes before anything else, too.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
So right,
Um,
you know the 3-2-1 rule.
right, exactly. Mark wants to know, should an organization require PowerShell scripts to be digitally signed by the organization? Is that going to protect you further?
Absolutely. I realize most organizations aren't at that level of sophistication, but if you are, absolutely, because that makes finding the ones that aren't really easy. So whether you're detecting something a rogue employee is doing or detecting something a ransomware actor, it makes the detection that much faster. So if you have the ability to sign and manage the signatures of those scripts, 100% do that.
Okay, great. We have time for one more question, I think, today, Alan. Um, Stephen wants to know, if all these ransomware options are clearly identified and taught by people like you by our website, ransomware.org, don't the ransomware groups just switch to another means? Don't they just find other avenues? This is an important question, and it kind of goes to, is it possible to get ahead of the criminals, to stay ahead, or is it really hopeless these days?
You know, what's interesting is they don't. Like I'm with you. You know, one of my
Hmm.
concerns as a security researcher is I publish information available on Twitter, available on your blog, in webinars like this all the time, for the methods that ransomware actors are doing, and they don't change, partly because they don't have to, because not enough people are putting in protections to detect these things, the methods that they're doing. And if you don't believe me, again, go look at the DFIR report, look at them for the last 3 years, and you'll see 3 years ago they were using Cobalt Strike. The things they published a month ago, we're still using Cobalt Strike. So we know the methods that they're using, we know how to detect those, but detecting and alerting and responding are really hard, and I know that. So it's easy for me to get up here and say these things. It's much harder for some of these security measures to be implemented, and the ransomware actors know that they don't need to change, and so they don't. Yes, if everybody started tightening up, I mean, it's what we saw. Now that more and more organizations are doing backups, ransomware actors have to move to extortion as part of this, because the just paying to decrypt the files isn't as effective as it used to be. So yeah, they do change, but it takes them a surprisingly long time to do that, because there are still too many targets for them out there, unfortunately, that are readily available.
Right. Really good advice, as always, Alan. I appreciate it very much. And with that, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks again, Alan Liska, for putting together a really informative presentation and for all of your insights in the Q&A. Again, your content is available through your book, which we link to on our website, and you're all over the place talking about ransomware, and we very much appreciate your time today.
Yeah, absolutely my pleasure. As always, thanks for the great questions. And thanks to everybody that tuned in. I really appreciate, again, the wonderful questions and the conversations you and I always have, Keith.
Great, thank you. Before we wrap up today, we have one more piece of business, and it's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Shakita Roberts Williams from Washington. So congratulations, Shakita. We'll be in touch with you to get your card very soon. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. That's thank you to Keeper, to Crowdstrike, to Rubrik, and to Duo Security. And as always, thanks for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event, and have a great rest of your day.